But I have to start off with the NBA and this continuing and developing story with Kevin Durant and the Brooklyn Nets. So Kevin Durant just met with Joe Tsai over the weekend and officially provided him with an ultimatum. Now, Joe Tsai is the governing owner of the Brooklyn Nets. And he told Joe Tsai, hey, listen, either you trade me or you fire both the head coach Steve Nash and the general manager Sean Marks. That was the ultimatum that he provided Joe Tsai. So Joe Tsai, of course, tweeted over yesterday, over the last couple hours, 24 hours yesterday, he reiterated his support for Steve Nash, for Sean Marks, not naming them directly, but he said, I support my staff and I back my staff's decision, as we will do whatever is in the best interest of the Brooklyn Nets. So that's the position and the public position that he's clearly taken. Now, let me first say this. I've actually always loved Kevin Durant as a basketball player. I've always respected the reverence that he's had for the game. I respect how much he is genuinely interested and genuinely passionate about the game of basketball. He's someone who clearly cares about basketball. Basketball is not just a job for him. Playing in the NBA, he doesn't give off the impression that playing in the NBA is simply a job, but his favorite hobby, that his life is all about basketball. He is a hooper day in and day out. And I have a lot of respect for guys that are fully committed and fully invested in their sport and in their craft. And I've always admired that about Kevin Durant. He's always been a no-nonsense type of guy, and all he wants to do is play basketball. And I truly, as a basketball fan, I truly hate that Kevin Durant, though he's done this onto himself, I do hate that he's in this situation and he's in this predicament. But with that being said, I detest how petulant he's been acting and how public he's been making the situation, because what Kevin Durant has always been, he's always been someone who has always been very mature. And I understand he tried to reach a resolution privately behind closed doors, and action clearly needed to be taken on his part. That's what he's felt. Obviously, that hasn't been able to happen at this point. And he's always been extremely approachable and cordial with the media. He's never shied away from reporters after big wins or big losses. He's always willing to speak. So he's always been the ultimate professional. He's always carried himself with the utmost professionalism in class and maturity, which is why I kind of despise the way that he's been acting in this situation. Because the way that I look at it is Kyrie Irving should be convicted of arson, and Kevin Durant essentially should be convicted of aiding and abetting, because those two guys wanted Steve Nash to be the head coach. And Sean Marks, say what you want about him, he's acquiesced to their every demand since their arrival. He's executed and pulled off every trade that they've wanted, for DeAndre Jordan, trading away Jared Allen, acquiring James Harden, then getting rid of James Harden, hiring Steve Nash. That was all Sean Marks. He's constructed good teams for those two guys. And as much kinship as they give off, clearly these two guys are not on the same page. And what we have right now is a real-life prisoner's dilemma. And one prisoner has already made a move, and that's KD. And again, as much as they like to give off the impression that they're on the same wavelength, clearly they're not, because Kyrie Irving's agent, who I believe is his stepmom, just came out and refuted a New York Times post claiming that Kyrie Irving, quote unquote, hates Steve Nash and Sean Marks. His agent and his stepmom has come out and denied that. So why would one person, if they were really working in cahoots, why would one individual publicly proclaim their disapproval and their opposition towards a coach and a GM, while the other one simultaneously gives their rubber stamp of approval? How would that work? That doesn't make any sense. If they're really working in concert with one another, they would relay the same message. So that's one error in this whole process, is that clearly those two guys are not on the same page. And so obviously from Kevin Durant's perspective, this is strategic. This is tactic. He is forcibly removing himself from the Brooklyn Nets. And I do think that ultimately he will accomplish his goal because the situation will become untenable. And I think that, ironically enough, as talented as the roster actually is and would be if he were to just simply return, to try to come back to a roster with Steve Nash leading the team as the head coach and Sean Marks still in the building, it just seems inhospitable, which is why I don't see it happen. Apologies for that. Which is why I just don't see it happening whatsoever. And so the situation right now, Kevin Durant will be traded. It's only a matter of time. The teams that seem most destined to acquire him are the Celtics, the Warriors, the Raptors, and the Heat. The Pelicans, I know, have been sprinkled in there a little bit. Now, of those teams, realistically, I see it coming down to the Celtics and the Warriors. The Warriors, I don't think, will give up much of their young talent, especially since they know that the market has cooled off substantially for Durant. And who knows how long the Nets are truly trying to just retain Durant and keep him on the roster. I don't see that happening much longer. So I don't think the Warriors are going to offer a very good trade or make a very good trade. So I think it ultimately is going to be the Celtics, because the Celtics can offer the Nets the best individual asset, which is Jaylen Brown. Obviously, there will be other components to the trade, but they will be offering the best piece. The best player in the trade, I think, would be Jaylen Brown. And I see that being a deal that both sides ultimately do, because I don't think the Nets can ultimately keep him. And, of course, I'll have a ripple effect because Kyrie Irving will likely be out of there right after. So I think that'll lead to his inevitable departure. And that whole situation will just kind of crumble. Now, it doesn't mean the Nets won't be able to compete. They may still have a good roster, but those two guys, I see their future being done. Now, as it relates to Steve Nash and Sean Marks, interestingly enough, for Steve Nash, and especially for their long-term deservedness of retaining their positions and their long-term viability with the Brooklyn Nets organization, for Steve Nash, this is someone who I think there's still question marks around. It's a very thorny situation with him because you obviously can't question his basketball resume. Do I think he's the best X's and O's coach? No, and I think that got exposed a little bit in the postseason. But again, it's early in his coaching career, and who's to say he can't improve if given more opportunities or if he was allowed to hold on to this position a little bit longer. I don't know how good he is at inspiring his players. We know that he's passionate. We know that he's extremely knowledgeable, and he can be a fiery guy. We've seen him as a player. He's an intense guy. So he clearly cares, and obviously his basketball acumen is through the roof. So it's just a matter of whether right now, if he's the best fit. And I don't think that it can hurt Joe Tsai to have an earnest contemplation and deliberation about whether or not he deserves to be there. I don't think it's unreasonable to at least look at other potential head coaches. Doesn't mean you move off Steve Nash, but I don't think it hurts to look at someone else. Now, with regard to Sean Marks, I actually think he's done a great job. And I think if one of those two guys is going to go, it would be Steve Nash. I think Sean Marks has done everything he could possibly do to, again, acquiesce to Kyrie and KD. Now, you can look at that as a mistake, but at the same time, I would argue that any GM in his position at the time that he was hired would have tried to execute the same traits. If they presented you with a situation at the time, rewind the clock 3 years ago, You hire Steve Nash and you can acquire Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Every GM in the league is going to do that, perhaps except the Warriors, who already had an established team. But every other team is going to do that. Every other team is going to try to pull off trades to appease and capitulate to Durant and Kyrie. It's only now that we have this 2020 hindsight that we can say, well, it was an utter disaster. But the construction of the team, which is the job of the general manager, he did a great job with that. The team just had some bad breaks. So I think if one of the two is going to go, it would ultimately be Steve Nash and not Sean Marks. But it's a terrible situation to be in, and I'm curious and eager to see how it all plays out.